Okay, remember when that Wagner plane went down? Uh, they were saying, oh, could have been this, could have been that. Maybe these people were responsible. You know, uh, there was all kinds of speculation. And I actually haven't heard any more about it. But at the time, what I thought was odd that one of the names being brought up was never the British. So the British are up to their neck in this thing. You always think of them as, bumbling tea drinkers. Uh, you don't think that they're involved in this as much as they are. They kind of keep a low profile. But I know there was bragging at one time that MI6 had enlisted like 100 Ukrainians, some of the worst of a bad bunch, specifically for like assassinations of political leaders and journalists and this sort of thing. This way, MI6 could do this stuff, but if something goes wrong, the Ukrainians get the blame. But at the time, nobody even mentioned the British, and I thought that was odd. Though, they had bragged about this sort of thing. Now, just the other day, yesterday, that, whatever it is, that American tranny that's the spokesman for the Ukrainian Secret Service, it was going on a hell of a rant, but talking about, assassinations and all this vicious stuff that they were going to be doing. They like the good thing is they like to brag about all their nonsense, but they're again taken out like journalists. If you say something bad about Ukraine or not positive about Ukraine, their intention is to take those people out. And I actually kind of, there are certain journalists that I do have concerns about because a lot of them are on that Ukrainian hit list. And that's what this 100 that are tied with MI6 are going to be going after. There's a lot of skullduggery going on behind the scenes here that people just kind of ignore. Like even these missiles that they were the British missiles that hit the Navy base in Crimea. Now, at the same time, there were British planes, farting around out on the other side of the Black Sea. They don't dare stray too far, but they claim that these missiles were launched by Ukrainian bombers. Well, I don't think Ukraine has very much left that flies, so I have my doubts about that. But these are air-launched missiles that they used. So we'll see. Oh, another thing, speaking about missiles, those ATACMs that we were going to be sending over, that we found under some couch cushion someplace. We didn't think we had them, and oh yeah, here we have them. Well, I suspect what these are ones that were listed to be dismantled. So they weren't actually on like the inventory that we normally keep of this stuff. Yeah, well, they're only good for so long, and if they're sitting in storage, then they have to be just taken apart. Well, we're sending every piece of junk we can over to Ukraine, and I think that's where these turned up from. Now, the bad part is, I think some of these are cluster munitions that they will be firing into Russia. into civilian populations because that's what they do with that sort of thing. Now, the longer they sit, the more unreliable they are. So there again, there will be those little petal mines laying all over hell in the middle of a populated area. There's a very good chance that that's what it was, though. It was stuff that we were actually going to discard. Well, but I love how they find money and they find missiles. Part of this, they're thinking, okay, we're going to really pour everything we can into Ukraine right now because we know this is all falling apart. If you pay any attention, you know this is all falling apart. But they figure if they do something really push now, they will have, be in a better bargaining position for peace talks. They want to have like a timeout. They think they can have like a ceasefire. That isn't going to happen. The Russians aren't going to go for that because that timeout, that would only give them a chance to build up more stuff. And the Ukrainians aren't going to just pause on their offensive or their counteroffensive or whatever they would like to call it. So they're going to keep pecking away. There's no way the Russians would never trust any kind of a ceasefire. There's no negotiating anymore. We have lost any credibility that we had. So there's no way they're going to go for this. They'd be absolute fools because all you're doing then is you're postponing it. It's going to happen again. They're going to, if you had a ceasefire for a year or 2 years, it's going to fire right back up again. And like I say, in the meantime, I don't believe there's any way you could get the Ukrainians to abide by this. And we, of course, would keep pumping weapons in there. So no, that ain't going to happen. But I think, the Russians have come to the conclusion there is no dealing with these people. There is no talking sense with these people. These people simply have to go. And I think that's what their intention is. Right now they're sitting there just waiting on the fools keep launching these counteroffensives, which just kill off so many people. But the Russians are in a fine position. But eventually the Russians are going to, and we have this theory that, winter's coming, the war season is ending. I don't think the Russians care. They're perfectly capable of fighting all winter. They intend to keep hammering away. Anytime we send anything in there, they're going to go after it. A lot of foolishness goes on. But, like the other day, when Zelensky was talking, because they're deathly afraid that we're going to quit supporting them. Because if we quit pouring money and weapons into this, it falls apart right now. Though there should be terrorism goes on forever unless Russia actually cleans that bunch out completely. This is going to be an ongoing thing. But Zelensky was hitting around that that there are Ukrainians all over the place, that if the support disappears, that these Ukrainians that are in all these other countries could react badly to that. Well, with a little encouragement. But you have to remember that we have a lot of Ukrainians here that we brought over. I always have to laugh when they say, oh, yeah, at the southern border, There's mysteriously a lot of Russian speakers, they said. Well, they ain't Russian speakers, they're Ukrainians that have come in. So we're well stocked with them. So if terrorist activities start happening here, because I'm sure, that's their intention. If things go bad over there, there will be repercussions to us here on our homeland. They have every intention of doing this. But in the meantime, they're going to use those assassins to take out journalists, political people. We're going to regret getting involved with that bunch of Nazis. I always have to laugh every time I see somebody does a video on Ukraine, and before it, YouTube always has to put up this little thing saying, how Russia's totally unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. That is such a load of crap. It's funny because there was a guy from NATO. He was a Swiss guy who was doing investigations into all this, and he showed just how ridiculous this statement was that they keep putting up in front of people's videos. It's just all hogwash. It's amazing that people believe that. Because yes, this was as provoked as it could be. It's what we wanted. It was the whole point of the whole operation from the very start of overthrowing their elected government. The whole point of the thing was to go at Russia. And we foolishly thought that, oh yeah, we can, by using these Ukrainian Nazis, we could really put a dent in Russia, and we bit off way more than we can chew. But no, there will not be some negotiated settlement. Can't be, because we have lost any trust that they could have in us. Just lie too much. Oh well. Anyway, I did go with the light crank wheels. I pressed them together for that SR motor, so it's XT, TT, lighter crank wheels in an SR motor. I decided that was the way to go. Boy, I tell you, they're not fun to. They're a bit of a battle. That pin goes in there very stiffly, but I got it in there now. I got to check on the trueness of the flywheels. Because you can have a shift this way. So I'll have to put them in a truing stand, but I have to invent a truing stand for these. Then use a dial indicator running on the bearing surface and make sure that they're square in there. Something I haven't done it with these Yamaha flywheels, just pressed together design, but I've done hundreds of Harley ones. They're bolt together design, where they actually bolt the shaft on and bolt the pin in. But I know how to do it, so it's not a big deal. But these press together ones, I don't own a press. My brother has a 20-ton press. And, I keep thinking of buying a press, but I'm going to have to get a 20-ton one, because anything lighter than that would not do it. I had the pin cold and the flywheels hot, and still, she was a tight push. lot of creaking and grunting. And those pins, the thing is they have to be in exactly right because the pin is hollow. And there is an oil hole right here. Now it feeds from this shaft, from the end in the side cover. The oil pressure feeds into the flywheel and then up into the rod set. Then it comes out from around the rod, the extra oil. So you have to have the right amount of play in the rod. If that's too tight, you're going to seize up that rod. Too loose, it'll hammer apart. So she was a lot of back and forth to get it exactly where I wanted it, but at the same time I had to make sure that I had that pin lined up with the oil hole because, if you had that hole like half covering the hole in the flywheel, you wouldn't get oil to the whole bottom end. Well, and the bottom end, the oil from there actually oils into the tranny, so yeah, it has to be right. But there was a lot of careful maneuvering to get that in there. But now I have to true it up, and like I say, I've done that many times before on other types of flywheels. But it's always a matter of finding what's high, what's low, and beating it into submission with a big brass hammer. Oh, it seems like a wild way of doing things, but that's how it's done. But I got that far anyway. But now I have to make up some kind of a stand. Uh, I could just knock together something very simple. Or I could even put it in a lathe, be able to just turn it by hand and use a dial indicator. But I play with these 500s a lot, so I think I'm going to make up a dedicated rig for these. Because I've got multiple sets of flywheels laying around to work on. But we'll see what goes on. But if you suddenly hear of mysterious, they were talking about assassinating people in Africa. If there's some leader they don't like, they're gonna sig them Ukrainians on him. But the Brits, they are up to skullduggery all the time. I have doubts about the competency of their military. But MI6, they are some snaky buggers. And for some reason, they're always able to stay in the shadows. But it's like our CIA, too. A lot of times they get, people think, well, maybe it was CIA. Yeah, well, CIA is all over. Our CIA and our State Department, nothing but a bunch of sneaks. But they try to avoid outright assassination. It just looks bad. But if you can get Ukrainians to do it for you. So now the Brits have got their pet Ukrainians to go around doing the dirty work, and I'm sure we'll borrow them now and again. Those people are going to be a problem. Until Russia completely completes their denazification. But it's funny in their, demilitarization and denazification in Ukraine. They're doing a fine job there, but in order to do it, they're wiping out most of the Ukrainians. I was glad to see, too, with the Ukrainians demanding that countries send back, to extradite their citizens that got the hell out. Now, Poland is doing it. And I suspect Germany is doing it, but they're keeping quiet about it. But there's a hell of a lot of countries just said no, that they're not going to do it. But in particular, Hungary. Hungary just laughed at them, said there's no way in hell they were going to do it. Hungary has been a rock through this whole thing. That's a solid country that looks out for its own good instead of interfering in everybody else. That's good. I'm impressed with Hungary, a country I never paid any attention to before. But they're minding their own business and they're minding it very well. That's impressive. But the Poles, that's a different story. Like I say, the Poles, they're sending people back, but also they're greatly increasing their military because the Poles have a great desire for that western side of Ukraine. And they're going into this, they're always thinking we're going to end up with that. They don't care what happens on the eastern side. That's nothing to them, though they were in it right from the beginning. Before the Russians even got involved in this, the Poles were over there raising hell with the Nazis. And it's funny too, like they always say, oh yeah, they used to say Ukraine had a Nazi problem. There were certain units, they said, that had Nazis in them. But they fixed that, they claimed, by breaking them up and spreading those people out into other units. Well, all they did was contaminate all of the other units that weren't the pro-Nazi bunch. I mean, that's how contamination works. Just takes a small amount. Put a handful of Nazis in a unit, won't be long. They're all Nazis. But Ukraine, I think those Poles have a great desire because they're buying weapons like crazy, building up their army like crazy. At first they were saying, oh, it was a threat from the Wagner in Belarus, though Wagner wasn't going to be going anywhere. But that was their excuse for building up the military. But really, they're sitting on that border with Ukraine waiting for an opportunity to go in there. And if they go in there, they ain't leaving. And I can foresee a time where it will be Poles fighting Ukrainians. This is going to happen. Yeah, well, see how it plays out.